Have you ever met someone the world walked right past, until the moment they became impossible to ignore? Ethan Langford didn't see her at first. He didn't want to. He was the kind of man whose shoes never touched a scuffed floor, whose voice could silence an entire lobby. He paused that morning outside the glass doors of the Crestwood Grand Hotel, scrolling through his phone, barking orders to his assistant. The man had just finalized a billion-dollar proposal that could make or break his career. Nothing else mattered until he saw her, a little girl sitting quietly in the corner of the executive lobby. 12 years old, maybe, frayed jeans, sweater one size too big, a library book open across her knees. Her name was Lena Brooks, though no one there knew that yet. She was reading about the stars, pages covered in tiny sticky notes written in careful handwriting. Ethan frowned, waving over the nearest security guard. "What is she doing here?" "Sir, she's just waiting." "Waiting?" His voice cut like glass. "This is the executive floor, not a daycare. Get her out of here." The girl looked up, startled, clutching her book as if it could protect her. The guard hesitated. Ethan's tone sharpened. "Her mother works here, doesn't she? Probably cleaning toilets upstairs. Tell her to keep her kid in the service halls where she belongs." Every head in the lobby turned. Every voice went silent. Lena lowered her eyes as he brushed past her, his shoulder knocking her backpack to the floor. Her pencils rolled across the marble tiles, clinking one by one like coins dropped in a well. He didn't stop to pick them up. But fate has a way of remembering moments like that. Because 8 hours later, that same man would be standing in front of that same girl, begging her to stay. Upstairs, in the glass-walled conference room, Caroline Ellis, Senior Vice President of Development, reviewed the final proposal for the Yamato Tech Partnership, a deal worth $1 billion. This project meant 240 new jobs, a groundbreaking AI system for accessibility, and the future of the entire company. The deadline? Midnight. The stakes everything. She checked her watch. The CEO, Mr. Nakamoto, a brilliant entrepreneur from Tokyo, was scheduled to arrive any minute. He was known for his precision, for never being late, for changing industries overnight. And when he walked in, every executive straightened up as though gravity itself had shifted. Caroline smiled, stood, extended her hand. But Nakamoto didn't speak. He typed something into his phone and turned the screen toward her. "I am deaf." "Where is the JSL interpreter?" Caroline's smile faltered. The interpreter was supposed to arrive any minute. She called the agency. The answer hit like a punch. Yuki called in sick. Backup stuck in traffic after a crash on the highway, 90 minutes out. Her stomach dropped. 90 minutes could destroy the deal. Nakamoto's face remained polite but distant. He started organizing his files again, a silent sign that he was ready to leave. And when Ethan Langford burst into the room with his perfect suit and fake confidence, it only made things worse. He took out his phone, opened Google Translate, and proudly held it up like a trophy. "We can just type," he said with a grin. The look Nakamoto gave him wasn't anger. It was disappointment, the kind that cuts deeper. He'd seen this before. People who thought his deafness was a problem to fix. He began gathering his things. Caroline's pulse raced. If he walked out, the partnership would collapse before it began. Hundreds of jobs, years of work, gone in a heartbeat. "Is there anyone here who knows Japanese Sign Language?" she asked desperately. No one answered. But one floor below, Lena Brooks sat in the staff lounge finishing her algebra homework. She could hear fragments of conversation through the cracked door, words like interpreter, deaf, emergency. Her heart skipped. Lena wasn't fluent, but she'd been learning sign language for months. American Sign Language mostly, with a few lessons in Japanese Sign Language from a documentary she'd watched over and over at the public library. She loved it. It made the world quieter, more thoughtful. But she was just a kid, and just an hour ago she'd been kicked out of that same executive floor by the same man yelling about service areas. Her mother's name badge sat beside her math book, Maria Brooks. Custodial staff, 9 years of service, 9 years of scrubbing floors so polished that people, like Ethan, could walk over them without noticing they shine. Lena looked at the badge for a long moment, and then she stood up outside the conference room. Her palms were damp with sweat. Her heartbeat felt louder than her footsteps. She knocked once. No answer. Knocked again. The door opened, and there was Ethan Langford, the man from the lobby. His expression turned from annoyance to disbelief. You again? You have got to be kidding me. He turned toward Caroline. Do I need to call security again? Lena's voice was small but firm. I can help. Ethan actually laughed, a dry, humorless sound. Help? Sweetheart, this is a billion-dollar negotiation, not a classroom project. Caroline's eyes flicked toward Lena. What do you mean, help? I know sign language, Lena said quickly. Not all of it. I'm still learning. But I can understand a lot, especially Japanese sign language. Ethan groaned. Caroline, she's a child. We can wait for the professional. We don't have time, Caroline interrupted softly. Her tone had changed, steady, urgent. She opened the door wider. Mr. Nakamoto is about to leave. Inside, Nakamoto was already reaching for his briefcase. But when Lena stepped into the room, he looked up. Their eyes met. And for a moment, the noise of the room disappeared. She raised her hands and signed slowly. Excuse me, sir. I'm sorry for the delay. It wasn't perfect, but it was polite, respectful, the kind of form used in Japanese business culture. Something shifted in Nakamoto's face. His shoulders relaxed slightly. His eyes softened. He signed back, quick and sharp. Lena hesitated, then smiled, understanding. A little, she signed. I've been studying. Caroline watched in stunned silence as the man who was about to walk out now leaned forward, actually listening. Ethan's smug grin was gone. Lena signed again, more confidently this time. If you let me, I can try to help. And in that moment, when a 12-year-old girl with trembling hands became the only bridge between two worlds, everything in that room changed. Caroline took a deep breath. Mr. Nakamoto, is this acceptable to you? He signed a long response, and Lena translated aloud, her voice trembling slightly. He says, he's grateful someone spoke to him like a person instead of a problem. The air in the room felt different now. Ethan looked away, his jaw tight. Caroline nodded slowly. Then we begin. Lena took her seat beside the executives, tiny compared to the suits surrounding her. Her backpack sat by her feet, the corner of her library book sticking out. Her mother was still downstairs, unaware that her daughter was about to change everything. The papers on the table rustled as the air conditioning hummed softly. Every sound seemed louder now that the room had fallen silent. Lena could feel her heart racing as she lifted her hands again. She translated Nakamoto's greeting, her voice low but clear. He says thank you for making the time to meet today. Caroline responded warmly, careful with her tone, and Lena signed it back. For the first few minutes it was simple, greetings, formalities, introductions. But then came the business terms, the real test. Nakamoto began signing faster, the motions fluid and technical. Lena tried to keep up, but some words were unfamiliar. Her fingers slowed, hesitating. Ethan shifted in his seat, making sure everyone noticed. See, he muttered. This is what I warned you about. We need a professional. Nakamoto caught the tone, turned his head sharply toward him, and signed something with sharp precision. Lena swallowed, then translated. He says honesty is more professional than pretending. The quiet that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was respectful. Caroline nodded to Lena to continue, and Lena, encouraged, straightened in her seat. She started creating her own shorthand on the notepad beside her. Little sketches, arrows, and signs she'd invented to represent words she didn't yet know. Each stroke of her pen was a small rebellion against the idea that she didn't belong here. The discussion deepened. Technical terms about artificial intelligence, neural pathways, speech-to-sign algorithms, concepts she'd only glimpsed in library books, filled the air. Nakamoto was explaining how his AI could translate emotion, not just words. Lena paused, thoughtful, then said softly, He's saying the goal isn't to make deaf people hear, it's to make the world listen. The executives exchanged glances. Caroline leaned forward. That changes everything. Ethan opened his mouth to argue, but no one was listening to him anymore. Minutes became hours. The rhythm in the room shifted. Lena wasn't just interpreting now. She was connecting people who had never truly communicated before. Nakamoto smiled at something she signed, a small joke about how hotel coffee always tasted like wet cardboard. The tension eased, replaced by laughter, quiet, genuine, human. Then suddenly the temperature dropped again. Ethan slipped a written note across the table toward Nakamoto, bypassing Lena completely. Nakamoto froze, his hand still. He looked at the paper, then pushed it back toward Ethan. His expression was calm, but his message was sharp. He began signing, slower this time, every gesture deliberate. Lena's voice trembled as she translated. He says if you don't respect my interpreter, you don't respect me. She is my voice. No one moved. Ethan's jaw tightened. He sat back, his face red, staring at the wall like it had betrayed him. Caroline turned her gaze toward Lena and smiled, just slightly, enough to say, "You belong here." When Nakamoto called for a short break, Lena slipped into the hallway, her legs unsteady. The adrenaline that had been carrying her began to fade and her hands shook. She leaned against the wall, breathing hard. That's when she heard footsteps behind her. Ethan. He didn't shout this time. His voice was calm, even friendly. "You've done well," he said. Lena glanced up, uncertain. "Thank you." "But this next part," he continued, lowering his tone, "it's complicated. Real negotiations, legal language, financial stakes. This isn't the place for a child. You've done your part. Go find your mom and tell her you made a difference today." His words were polite, but they felt heavy, final, like a door closing. Lena nodded slowly, even though something inside her screamed that leaving would be wrong. She watched him walk away, every step deliberate, confident. He didn't even look back. She stood there, frozen, staring at her reflection in the elevator's chrome doors. Her hair was slightly messy, her oversized sweater wrinkled from hours of sitting. She looked like a kid again. Small, ordinary. Maybe he was right. Maybe she was out of her depth. Then a voice came from behind her. "You're shaking the walls, kid." It was Rosa, the concierge who'd been answering phones all day, the one who always sneaked Lena extra cookies when she waited for her mom after school. She smiled gently and nodded toward the window. "Come here." They stood side by side, looking out at the city lights beginning to glow. Rosa said quietly, "Every light out there belongs to someone who was told they weren't ready. But they showed up anyway." Lena's eyes burned. "What if I fail?" Rosa looked at her like she was seeing someone older than 12. "Then you fail trying. But don't you dare walk away when you're exactly where you're meant to be." Just then, the staff door opened. Her mother, Maria, stepped out with a rag still tucked into her apron. "Lena?" The relief on her face lasted only a moment before she saw her daughter's trembling hands. "Baby, what's wrong?" Lena's voice cracked. "They need me in there, but they said I'm too young." Maria cupped her daughter's face with hands that smelled faintly of bleach and lemon soap. "Listen to me," she said softly, but there was iron in her voice. "You've been good enough your whole life. If that man in there still wants you, you stay. Don't let anyone decide your worth for you." Something shifted in Lena's chest. Her mother's words lit something she couldn't describe. Courage, maybe, or anger, or both. She nodded, straightened her shoulders, wiped her eyes, and walked back toward the conference room. When she opened the door, Nakamoto looked up from his seat. His expression softened immediately. He signed, "You came back." Lena smiled faintly. "I wasn't finished." Ethan said nothing. He didn't have to. The room already knew who was leading now. Caroline gestured to her seat. "Let's continue." Lena sat down again, her heartbeat steady. The next phase was the hardest. Money, equity, power. The part of business where kindness usually disappears. Nakamoto signed his proposal. "Equal partners. 50-50, Lena translated. Her voice filled the quiet space. "He wants shared ownership. Equal say, equal value." Ethan spoke before anyone else could. "That's not standard. We bring the capital, infrastructure, market access. 70-30 is fair." Lena signed it. Nakamoto's expression changed instantly. His movements became sharper, colder. "He says," Lena continued carefully, "standard for who? For people who think his ideas are worth less because he can't hear their arrogance?" Caroline inhaled sharply. The room froze again. Ethan opened his mouth, but Caroline raised her hand. "Mr. Nakamoto," she said softly, "we hear you." But Nakamoto wasn't done signing. His hands moved faster, passionate, cutting through the air. Lena hesitated, then turned to Caroline. "May I say something? Not as an interpreter, as someone who's been in this room." Ethan almost exploded. "Absolutely not." Caroline didn't even look at him. "Go ahead, Lena." Lena looked from Caroline to Nakamoto, then spoke quietly but clearly. "He built this technology because people didn't listen to him, because people treated him like silence meant weakness. If we start this partnership by doing the same thing, by not listening, we've already failed him." The air trembled with her words. Ethan leaned back, eyes narrowed. Caroline leaned forward, her face calm but her voice unyielding. "You're right," she said. "Both of you." She closed her folder and looked at Nakamoto. 50-50, equal partners. And I'd like your input on who leads this project." Lena translated, her hands trembling again, but this time it was from disbelief. Nakamoto paused, then smiled. "He says," she whispered, "at 12 years old, I understand what most adults never do. That respect is the first word of every language." Caroline extended her hand across the table. "Then we have a deal." And when Nakamoto took it, Lena realized she'd just witnessed the moment the world began to change. When they stood, Caroline turned to Lena. "You just saved this partnership," she said softly. "You didn't just translate, you negotiated." Lena smiled, though she barely believed it herself. Nakamoto signed something else, slower this time, and she translated through the lump in her throat. "He says thank you for giving his words a voice that people finally heard." That night, when Lena finally walked out of that building, she wasn't the same girl who'd been told to leave the lobby. She was something else entirely, someone who mattered. The next morning, she would wake up to find the world had noticed her. But for now, she was just a 12-year-old girl walking home beside her mother, hand in hand under a sky full of city lights, each one flickering like a small reminder, invisible, no more. The sun rose over the city in streaks of orange and gold, spilling light across the glass towers of downtown. Inside the Crestwood Grand, the staff buzzed with nervous energy. Every floor gleamed brighter than usual, every uniform freshly pressed. There was electricity in the air, the kind that hums right before something historic happens. It had been 24 hours since Lena Brooks changed everything. The partnership between Yamato Tech and Crestwood Hotels was finalized overnight, the billion-dollar deal sealed with applause, tears, and disbelief. By morning, every major outlet had the story. A 12-year-old interpreter bridges billion-dollar deal between global tech and hospitality giant. Lena didn't fully understand what going viral meant, but when her mother showed her the dozens of reporters waiting outside the hotel entrance, she felt her stomach twist. Cameras, microphones, strangers calling her name. It didn't feel real. She clutched her mother's hand tightly. "Do I have to go?" she whispered. Maria smiled gently. "Only if you want to be heard again, baby." Inside, the ballroom had been transformed for the press conference. 75 journalists, CEOs from rival chains, government officials. Even the mayor was rumored to be watching live. Lena and her mother sat quietly in the back row, away from the stage lights. She wasn't expected to speak today. A professional interpreter had arrived last night, credentialed, polished, experienced. Lena was a guest now, not the bridge she had been yesterday. The stage glittered with banners and microphones. Mr. Nakamoto walked up with quiet confidence, adjusting his suit. The new interpreter stood beside him, posture perfect, face composed. As cameras flashed, Nakamoto began to sign his opening remarks, elegant, deliberate movements that carried warmth and gravity. The interpreter's voice filled the room smoothly. "Mr. Nakamoto thanks everyone for being here today. He is proud to announce the beginning of a revolutionary partnership dedicated to accessibility and inclusion in hospitality." The translation was accurate, perfect even, but it wasn't alive. Lena felt it immediately. Something was missing. The interpreter's words were correct, but they carried no emotion, no heart. She watched Nakamoto sign a longer statement, his expressions softening as his hands moved faster. He was telling a story, something personal about his father. The interpreter's tone didn't change. He says this project is important for inclusion, the interpreter recited mechanically. Lena's chest tightened. That wasn't what he said. She could see it in his face. Nakamoto paused mid-sentence. His fingers stopped. His eyes narrowed slightly toward the interpreter. He signed something sharp, brief. Lena translated instinctively under her breath. That's not what I said. The interpreter blinked, flustered. Sir, I translated accurately. Nakamoto signed again, more firmly. You translated words, not meaning. A murmur spread through the room. Cameras turned. Journalists exchanged glances. A story was unfolding right before them, and it wasn't the one the company had planned. Caroline Ellis, standing at the side of the stage, felt her pulse quicken. She could sense it. The moment was unraveling. In the back row, Lena couldn't stay still. She leaned forward, watching Nakamoto's hands, reading his frustration. He was trapped again, heard but not understood. The same look he'd had when Ethan tried to use Google Translate. The same invisible cage. Her mother whispered, Lena, stay here. But Lena shook her head. He needs me. Before Maria could stop her, Lena stood and began walking down the aisle. Each step seemed to echo louder than the last. Reporters turned their heads. The interpreter faltered mid-sentence as everyone noticed the small girl in the oversized sweater, making her way to the stage. Caroline's eyes widened. For a second, she considered stopping her. It would be safer, cleaner, professional. But then she remembered the girl from yesterday, the one who refused to shrink. So instead, she said softly into the microphone, Ladies and gentlemen, this is Lena Brooks. She was Mr. Nakamoto's interpreter yesterday. If he prefers her today, we will honor that. The professional interpreter froze, humiliated. Slowly, she stepped aside. Nakamoto smiled, relief washing over his face like sunlight breaking through a storm. He signed, Are you ready? Lena took her place beside him. Always, she signed back. The room fell silent. Every camera focused on them. Nakamoto began again, not from the middle but from the start. His story this time was slower, deeper. He spoke of his childhood, of teachers who mistook silence for stupidity, of a father who hid him from business partners because he didn't know how to explain his son's deafness. Lena's voice carried through the speakers. He says the world told him that people like him should stay quiet, that leadership requires a voice. So he built technology that gives every person a voice that cannot be ignored. The room was still. Not a whisper, not a cough. Even the clicking of cameras stopped for a moment. Nakamoto continued, signing faster now, his eyes bright. He spoke of his dream. An AI that wouldn't replace human interpreters but would ensure that no one ever sat in silence waiting to be understood. Lena's words followed him like music, translating not just his meaning but his feeling. He says deafness isn't a weakness. It's a different rhythm of understanding. This technology isn't to make deaf people fit the world. It's to make the world finally listen. Applause began softly, scattered, then grew louder. But it stopped just as suddenly when a voice rose from the audience. It was Ethan Langford. He had slipped into the back of the room, his expression unreadable. Mr. Nakamoto, he said loudly, don't you think using a 12-year-old as your primary interpreter sends the wrong message about professionalism? The air turned electric. Cameras swung toward him. Reporters whispered. Lena froze. Her heart pounded so hard she could barely hear. Nakamoto turned to her and began signing again, calm, deliberate. Her voice returned, steady this time. He says professionalism isn't measured by age or credentials. It's measured by how you treat people. Yesterday, a 12-year-old showed more respect than a room full of executives. Gasps rippled across the crowd. Ethan's face flushed. Nakamoto continued signing. Lena translated the final blow. If her age offends you, the problem isn't her. It's your understanding of dignity. Applause erupted. Not polite clapping, real thunderous applause. People stood. Reporters cheered. Caroline was the first to rise, then the others followed. until the entire ballroom was on its feet. Ethan sank into his chair. Invisible for the first time in his career, Nakamoto turned toward Lena. He signed softly, just for her. "You are my bridge. Never forget that." Lena smiled, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Thank you for letting me matter," she signed back. He shook his head gently. "You always mattered. Today they just learned to see it." Caroline walked onto the stage, embracing Lena tightly. Her voice trembled with pride. "You didn't just translate today, Lena, you made the world listen." That night, the clip of that moment, the confrontation, the translation, the standing ovation spread across the internet like wildfire. By morning it had over 40 million views. Headlines flooded every platform. "The girl who made the world listen. Maid's daughter redefines power. How a 12-year-old changed corporate history." But for Lena, it wasn't about fame. It was about something else entirely. Because when she returned to school that Monday, a classmate she barely knew tapped her shoulder and signed awkwardly, "Hello," and that single sign told her everything she needed to know. She hadn't just changed a company, she'd changed the world's language of respect. Weeks passed, but the world didn't move on the way it usually does. What happened at the Crestwood Grand became a spark that refused to go out. Every news channel replayed the same clip, Lena standing beside Nakamoto, translating his truth with the kind of courage that made grown executives cry. Journalists called it the silence that spoke. Teachers shared it in classrooms. Parents played it for their kids at dinner tables. But while the world talked about her, Lena just wanted to go back to being normal. She still helped her mom fold laundry on weekends. She still ate breakfast on the same chipped kitchen counter. Yet nothing was the same anymore. The hotel had changed. The city had changed. And soon, her life would too. 3 weeks after the press conference, Caroline Ellis called a meeting. The entire senior team gathered in her office, nervous and curious. She looked out the window before turning to face them. "It's time we prove that inclusion isn't a headline, it's a habit." That afternoon, Crestwood Hotels announced a new division. The Bridge Initiative, a company-wide program dedicated to finding hidden talent among hourly staff. Custodians, kitchen workers, night clerks, people who had always existed in the background were suddenly being interviewed for leadership programs, language courses, scholarships. Reporters swarmed again. "Where did this idea come from?" one asked Caroline. She smiled. "From a 12-year-old girl who reminded us that greatness doesn't need permission." Lena and her mother were invited to the launch event. Maria wore her best dress, a simple blue one she'd bought secondhand but ironed until it looked brand new. When they stepped into the grand ballroom again, there were no guards asking her to leave, no sneers from executives. People looked at her and saw what they should have seen all along. Caroline greeted them personally, her expression soft. "Maria, I wanted to tell you this in person. We're promoting you to Director of Staff Development." Maria blinked, confused. "Director? But You've been developing people here for 9 years," Caroline interrupted gently. "You just weren't given the title." Maria covered her mouth, tears gathering. "What will I even do?" "Find the ones who've been invisible," Caroline said. "Train them, mentor them, help them grow. You know how." When she turned to Lena, she smiled again. "And your scholarship starts today. We've set aside funds for your education, whatever school you choose. And when you're ready, there's a permanent place for you here." Lena stared at the printed letter in her hands, the gold company seal shining under the chandelier. She wasn't sure what to say. Her whole life had been built on staying small enough not to get in anyone's way. Now the world was handing her space. "Thank you," she whispered. Before the applause faded, Nakamoto stepped forward with a small box. He placed it in Lena's hands and nodded for her to open it. Inside was a silver pin, polished smooth, engraved with a single Japanese word, Hashi, bridge. He signed quietly. "This is yours. You built what no one else could." Lena swallowed hard. "I just wanted to help." "And that," he signed, smiling, "is how every revolution begins." Over the next months, Crestwood Hotels transformed. Maria's new department uncovered stories that felt like miracles. Luis, a dishwasher from Ecuador, turned out to be a self-taught engineer who had built water-saving systems in his village. He was promoted to sustainability consultant. A night guard named Arjun, who used to read medical textbooks on his lunch breaks, was reconnected with a recertification program so he could practice medicine again. The company didn't just change policies, it changed culture. Staff began teaching each other languages during breaks. Management stopped seeing background workers and started seeing human potential. Meanwhile, Nakamoto's AI spread fast. Within 6 months, major hotel chains were lining up to partner. His technology appeared in lobbies, elevators, conference rooms, anywhere people needed to communicate but couldn't. Guests who were deaf could now check in, order meals, and report issues seamlessly. For the first time, accessibility wasn't an afterthought. It was an expectation. And every time Nakamoto presented the system at conferences, he refused to hire anyone else as his interpreter. "I already have the best," he would say with a smile, gesturing toward the girl beside him. Lena's world expanded with every trip. Tokyo, London, São Paulo, places she'd only seen on maps now welcomed her. She learned how to greet people in dozens of languages, not from textbooks but from laughter and conversation. She was still just 13, still awkward, still nervous before big crowds, but she'd found a rhythm in the way people listened now. She still rode the same bus to school, though. She still helped her mother cook dinner, and every Saturday, they went back to the hotel for lunch in the employee cafeteria, sitting with the same cooks and cleaners who used to joke that they'd never see the executive floor. Now their kids had scholarships too, but success didn't stop at Crestwood. Within a year, the Bridge Initiative had spread across industries. Companies that once ignored their workers scrambled to create similar programs. "We don't want to be the business that missed our Lena," one CEO admitted in an interview. Applications to Crestwood quadrupled. People wanted to work where potential was seen. When Lena turned 13, Nakamoto flew in from Tokyo for her birthday. His gift was simple, a sleek tablet preloaded with every major sign language database on Earth, powered by his own AI. On the back was an engraving, "For the girl who taught the world to listen." He signed, "You changed more than one company, Lena. You changed expectation itself." She smiled shyly. "I just told the truth," he laughed. That's all history ever remembers. At the end of that summer, a brass plaque appeared in the Crestwood Grand Lobby, right where she'd once been told she didn't belong. It read, "In this place Lena Brooks reminded us to see." One afternoon, months later, a young boy sat in that same lobby chair reading a book on sign language. His uniform was too big, his shoes a little worn. Lena passed by on her way to a meeting and stopped. "That's a great book," she said. He looked up wide-eyed. "Are you Lena Brooks?" She smiled. "Maybe. Are you learning ASL?" He nodded eagerly. "I saw your video. I want to talk to my cousin. She's deaf." Lena sat beside him, showing him how to sign hello. The boy laughed when he got it right, his hands clumsy but full of pride. And in that quiet moment, two people signing in the middle of the hotel lobby, it was clear that what she'd built wasn't just a bridge. It was a path that others could walk long after she was gone. The world had finally learned to listen. Years passed, and the world continued to change in quiet ways that no one could have predicted. What began in one hotel conference room spread across borders, industries, and languages. The Bridge Initiative became more than a program. It became a movement. Governments copied it, universities studied it, and corporations built their reputations around it. Everywhere, stories like Lena's began to appear. A supermarket cashier who spoke 6 languages was promoted to regional communications manager. A janitor who had been a musician before losing his home recorded his first album through a grant funded by the initiative. And in schools, children were learning sign language not as charity, but as respect. By the time Lena turned 16, her name was in textbooks. Not in the section about business or technology, but in the one about empathy. She gave talks occasionally, but she still preferred to listen. When reporters asked her what success felt like, she always said the same thing. "It feels like being heard without having to raise your voice." Maria Brooks, once a night custodian, now ran a department that oversaw thousands of employees across all Crestwood branches. Her office was on the top floor, the same floor she had once been forbidden to walk through without permission. She never redecorated it. She kept the same simple plant from the staff room on her desk as a reminder. She often said, "Titles don't make people visible. Attention does." Caroline Ellis became CEO of Crestwood Holdings. Under her leadership, profits soared. Not because of marketing, but because of culture. She was named Executive of the Year for proving that humanity could be a business model. When asked what inspired her, she said, "A girl with a backpack full of library books who refused to wait for permission to matter." Nakamoto's AI grew beyond hospitality. It entered hospitals, schools, and public service departments. Deaf patients could now speak with doctors directly. Refugees communicated without interpreters. People connected across barriers that had lasted centuries. The system didn't erase difference, it illuminated understanding. And Nakamoto always credited the same person. "Without her," he would say in interviews, "my work would have stayed an invention. She turned it into a revolution." One morning, Lena received a letter from the United Nations. She had been selected to receive the Global Youth Humanitarian Award for advancing communication equality. She read it twice, then quietly folded it and slipped it into the pocket of her old Goodwill sweater. The same one she'd worn the day she walked into that conference room years ago. The ceremony was in Geneva, a hall filled with leaders and translators speaking in dozens of tongues. When her name was called, Lena walked to the stage, palms sweating. Nakamoto was there, smiling proudly in the front row beside Maria and Caroline. The applause echoed like waves, but she didn't wait for it to fade before she began. "I was 12, she said, "when I realized silence isn't the absence of sound, it's the absence of attention. People aren't invisible because they lack voices, they're invisible because no one looks." Her voice was calm, steady. "I don't want to live in a world where you have to do something extraordinary just to be seen. I want to live in a world where being human is enough." When she stepped down, the entire room stood. Not out of politeness, but because they knew she had just said something the world needed to remember. After the ceremony, she and her mother walked along Lake Geneva under the fading light. "You remember what I told you?" Maria said softly. "About being good enough?" Lena smiled, watching the water shimmer. "You were right, but it wasn't about being good enough for them. It was about being good enough to keep showing up." 2 years later, a museum in Washington opened a permanent exhibit called The Language of Bridges. At its entrance stood a small display, a marble bench and a bronze plaque that read, "Dedicated to the moment the world began to listen." Below it, a digital screen replayed the video of the original negotiation, the standing ovation, the press conference, the laughter, the tears. On the opening day, Lena, now 18, visited quietly before the crowds arrived. She sat on the bench reading the names etched beneath the plaque, her mother's, Caroline's, Nakamoto's, and then her own. She stared at it for a long time, trying to understand how the world could change so much from one act of courage. A little girl approached her, holding a notepad and pen. She signed shyly, "Are you the girl from the video?" Lena nodded. "I am." The girl signed again, "I'm learning sign language because of you." Lena smiled and signed back. "Then you're already part of the story." The girl grinned and sat beside her, practicing clumsy but determined signs while her parents took photos from a distance. Lena looked around the exhibit, the pictures of deaf children using Nakamoto's software in classrooms, the screen showing workers in uniforms presenting ideas to executives who finally listened, the letters from people who had found their voices. She realized this wasn't her story anymore. It belonged to everyone who had ever been unseen and decided to speak anyway. Years later, long after headlines had faded, the plaque in the Crestwood Grand Lobby remained. Travelers passed it every day, luggage wheels clattering across the floor, never knowing the story behind the words. But sometimes someone would stop, read it, and smile as if they understood something important. And once in a while, a young employee would leave a book or a note beside the bench that simply said, "Thank you for reminding us to see." Some revolutions happen with noise and crowds. Others begin quietly, with a girl sitting in a lobby reading about the stars, waiting for someone to notice. Lena never wanted fame. She wanted understanding, and she got it, not just for herself but for millions who'd been unheard for too long. Because she proved one timeless truth. Being seen isn't a reward. It's a right. And it starts the moment someone finally decides to look.